Awesome. Well, first of all, it's great to have everybody that's kind of tuned in today. Um, the topic that we're going to be talking about here is unlocking automation in architecture. If you work at an architecture firm today, that there's really been a lot of change that's been happening in our industry, and um, things that we're going to be looking at are some of those changes that have recently happened from the technology side. And we're also going to be looking at this through the lens of metrics that really we can track with our automation. We're going to be looking at kind of the methods, the tools, and the tricks that we can use to automate aspects of our design workflows. And we also want to kind of map out what are those major milestones within a project that we have opportunities to potentially automate in certain ways. So one thing I just want to add here up front is a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is going to be in regards to various AEC tech startups and specifically AI topics. So with all of that being said, this is a presentation that's made to reflect today's events and my knowledge and GRAITEC's knowledge of the current environment. What we say today might be out of date in a week, a month, a year. That's just the nature of how fast things are changing. So I kind of wanted to open with this. This is a favorite art piece of mine. It's the prologue and the promise by Robert McCall. Um, he's a celebrated artist, and he's done a lot of work with NASA. And his ability to blend kind of this interesting architecture, fantasy, utopian visions is really something that a lot of people, myself included, appreciate about his works. So if we look at this document, or this, in this case, art piece, what you can kind of see is this progression of the profession of architecture. It's like a timeline, and it walks us through history, showing how our building and construction technology has evolved over time. And it takes us from these early wonders like the pyramids. We see classical Greek architecture, the Parthenon out there, and we can kind of progress into the industrial age, and increasingly the design and the buildings get bolder and more audacious in their vision. It's a fun image to consider, right? But I think where the real magic occurs is McCall's vision for the future. Here, architecture leaps into a world where everything is possible. We have floating cities, buildings that blend with nature, and designs that go beyond what we know today. It's really a world where advancements in design and construction technology opens doors to endless possibilities. And that's really why I wanted to show this today, because at least for me, McCall's work is more than just a painting. It's a source of inspiration, and it pushes us to think bigger, to imagine a future where our creations can really be unconstrained by our perceptions of what limits us. So to put this another way, this is kind of an interpretation, one man's interpretation of what's possible. And the fun thing about this is that as we've kind of moved into the 21st century and we've moved into the age of AI, this kind of Imagineering practice has become widely available and automatable through new AI tools. So this is the genesis of reflection, and it's actually not a real art piece. I guess you could say it is, but this is something that I made for this presentation using ChatGPT and its visualization tools. So I gave it a prompt and I asked it, generate an image for me. going to be a concept rendering, and I want it to be rendered in a watercolor and pen medium. I give it kind of a direction of what the form is going to look like and maybe what some of the design moves are. And also try to provide some materiality to it. There's some context, and then ChatGPT takes that, runs with it, it generates an image. This is, in some ways, kind of a cataclysm, right? And now ChatGPT has been on the scene here for, several years and in the public consciousness for at least a year. But what we're seeing is this continual progression of this technology and it getting more and more sophisticated and more capable in what it can do. What we see here with this version of ChatGPT, it was actually released last Wednesday and features a number of new improvements. And one of them is that it's fully integrated its chatbot, image generator, and internet search capabilities all into a single UI. So I wanted to show both of these images side by side to really put in perspective that as architects, we're kind of entering an opportunity to reimagine what even automation could look like. A year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the things that we were talking about when we were thinking about automation was a lot simpler in terms of can we use BIM to kind of accelerate the design process and the documentation process? Can we use some kind of application with an API, like Dynamo to go from Revit to Excel or something? And these are all things that are still very valid and important aspects of automation. But for architects, we have to think a little bit bigger about what automation looks like in today's environment, because things are changing so rapidly, because the capabilities and the tools that are being built for us are completely changing the game. We can't be thinking about this the old way. We have to think about this in a new way. And kind of to that point, to reinforce this, Autodesk University was 2 weeks ago, right before Thanksgiving, and their big announcement, no surprise really, was their Autodesk AI platform. I'm not going to really break down everything that goes into what they've announced here, but high level, they have a variety of tools that they are emphasizing their AI capabilities and further developing. So for most of us, we use Autodesk products like Revit and Forma. And so the reality is that even the mothership, the dominant player in this industry, is jumping on the AI train and they're starting to build stuff. But it goes beyond that. If we look at kind of the private equity venture capital space, which is really the source of our innovation funding in the startup world, we've seen this absolute explosion in funding for generative AI startups, companies that are focused on transforming industries through the application of generative AI technology. $14.1 billion was outlaid in funding just through June of this year. So in a 6-month time span, we have $14.1 billion. And that money is going to real startups with really talented people. I advise a number of these startups. And just to give you a quick snapshot of a few of them, these are all construction, design technology, and other applications that are really focused on solving aspects of our industry in really innovative ways, and AI being kind of this foundation. And this is just a small snapshot. I want to emphasize that. It's just a small snapshot of what's coming to market. And these are companies that are equipped with a lot of funding, a lot of talented engineers and software developers, and they're going after real problems that we have as architects, as engineers, in the field. And this stuff is coming to market on a weekly basis. So what does that mean for us in terms of, if we're thinking about automation, if we're thinking about how we can maybe position our company to be better able to take advantage of some of this technology that's hitting the scene, it's worth taking a step back and thinking about this kind of with a strategic mindset, if you will. When we are kind of going into our firms, I saw the attendee list. We have a cross section of principals, CEOs, BIM managers, and just project managers. So there's a spectrum of people listening in. What's really important here is to understand that to be successful, we have to think strategically and approach this fire hydrant that's just blasting water at us, and be able to step back and understand where we can activate these technologies, right? Where can we unlock this technology to facilitate automation for our architecture practices? The Invincible Company was a book. It came out, I want to say, about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more recent than that. But it's a great book. I encourage anybody on this call to check it out. But it effectively talks about how to reposition your firm, your company, to be able to adopt this new technology, to adopt new ideas. And it's a lot of it's about creating a culture of innovation. But one of the key points that it brings to the forefront is to be able to take advantage of the changing paradigms. We have to be able to strategically think about how to evaluate the new technology and how to implement it in a way that generates a significant ROI. Right? We don't want to try to automate just for the sake of automating. If you do that, you're putting yourself at risk of just throwing a lot of money and time away if you don't have a purpose and a clear plan for how you're going to go about this. So what I want to do is I want to kind of take you guys through my process of how I think about unlocking automation in architecture. And where it starts for me is really in recontextualizing the project lifecycle. When we think about architecture as a design process, we really get into a 6-stage sequence. And this is a diagram inspired by John Henning. He's an architect. He does some really good writing about AI and architecture. And this is inspired by his work. But effectively, we break down the architectural design process into the core stages. And really, we can break that into this idea of research and design brief, really that pre-design PD phase. We get into the preliminary sketching, which is where we get that schematic design, SD. And then we go into design development, DD, right? Building permitting and technical drawings, which kind of spans that construction document space. And then we get into CA, into construction administration, or what we might call observation services. Inside each of these phases are a variety of activities that we as architects and designers perform in service of the project. what is really key here is that being able to get out of kind of the world of your design software. It's not Revit. It's about this overall project lifecycle, the design process from start to finish, and then being able to identify those specific activities that really compose each of those phases. So when we get into that pre-design phase, there are specific things that we're doing. We're looking at, basically preliminary programming. What is ultimately the composition of a potential building on this site, right? Feasibility study. What's the budget that we have to work with? And then ultimately, what that'll yield is kind of a fee and a service proposal that funds the rest of the architecture firm's work on that project. Conversely, we can also think about this from the client owner side, right? The owner is going to have interactions and activities that occur in each of these phases for the most part. Again, we look at that pre-design phase. They're going to kind of come in and they're going to want to look at precedent studies. They're going to analyze that program that we provide them. And they're going to give that feedback and ultimately rationalize it against their budget and their expected ROI. Every one of those steps represents an opportunity to implement some level of automation, in particular with the AI front. Every step of this process has opportunity. And so with that knowledge and with this mindset, we can begin to kind of map different applications, different technologies, different tools that might represent a use case for us as architects to potentially automate aspects of these designs. And automation to me spans beyond just simple process or task automation. It's also about bringing in, enriching the design process, bringing in the ability to iterate more, to consider more angles for the data. From an analysis perspective, can we analyze our designs in different ways? So let's kind of walk through some of the stuff that's out there today. And we'll start with kind of this pre-design phase, right? So we have this fee and service proposal and preliminary programming. And what we find is that there's really a key component to making all of this work, which is we need metrics. We need metrics to drive insights. And ultimately, when we think about metrics, what we're really saying is that we're trying to quantify performance and efficiency, both as a firm, right, as the services that we provide, but also the designs and the buildings that are being created. How do they perform financially and from a sustainability, energy, the way people use the buildings and interact with the spaces. There are metrics that we can attach to all of these things. And by providing measurable data, these metrics allow us to understand the ROI and the impact. And that's really important when we are thinking about evaluating and ultimately guiding the implementation of automation tools and automating processes, especially when resources are limited. I think the majority of the people on this call are coming in from firms that are less than, let's say, 1,500 people. And what that means is that you have a budget for innovation. You have a budget for maybe process and automation, but it's probably small, probably rather limited. We're not a Google. We're not an OpenAI with hundreds of millions, or I guess billions of dollars in funding, we've got to pick and choose what we go after. Metrics help drive those insights to inform us of where we can apply our limited resources. And it also helps us to understand and quantify where impact on our design process is going to be greatest. So when we think about kind of this early stage, the preliminary design, this research and design brief, we do have a couple of high profile platforms and applications that I suspect many of you are familiar with, but I want to talk about them in greater detail in context of what we're looking at here. So Forma is, formerly SpaceMaker, but it's Autodesk premier kind of a state of the future, their Forma platform. And one of the big things that Forma does is it enables you to do site feasibility studies at the very earliest stages, and it enriches that capability by bringing in data-driven insights. TestFit is a similar application that's probably today really focused on multifamily, and I think warehouses is something they're really trying to expand into right now. But ultimately, when we look at these applications, what they're trying to do is they're trying to attack some of those core components of that pre-design phase. They're going to help with that preliminary programming, and they're going to give us kind of an understanding of a budget analysis, right? Both in terms of metrics like your FAR, like your density, right? And things that we can use to present back to the developer, to the client. We think you can generate X ROI on this site because we can achieve this kind of density with these multifamily units. And there's numbers that back that up. From the perspective of an architecture firm, there's another number that really matters in this situation, and that is that the conversion rate on these design briefs can vary, but it's not 100%. And a lot of firms invest a lot of time and money as a business development cost to put together these design briefs for developers without the promise of really having the work of the project to be approved, right? So what that means is that this is one of the phases that is most impactful in terms of if we can make ourselves faster and to generate higher quality deliverables to the client, we're going to increase our win percentage. We're going to increase our business generation. And again, that's grounded in this idea that we can do better proposals in less time. Better proposals because we're able to evaluate more scenarios, and we're able to evaluate them with the power of data, metrics that inform us. Beyond just the Forma and TestFit, there are a number of different startups that are entering this space and trying to kind of participate in this earliest stage of the design process. And what I would encourage you all to think about here in terms of unlocking automation is think about if your firm is using SketchUp or you're using Rhino or something as your kind of your, let's say your schematic design or kind of in between PD and SD tool, that's great. But before then, when your principals are having your meetings and discussing kind of these potential deals, where can you begin to bolt on these new AI-powered tools to ultimately elevate their abilities to compete in the market. Once we get into the SD phase and the preliminary sketching, this is where we're starting to rationalize our design. It's where we're beginning to pull things together and make something that could be a real potential form for our site, and begin to imbue it with the characteristics that ultimately define it. Its materiality, its number of stories, its height, how it's positioned on the site. And with these, there's also a ton of tools that are hitting the market that are focused on elevating our capabilities on this front. We can see Hypar, which is another established startup. And, you know, in the case of Hypar, they built on top of their platform an AI prompt-based tool, which enables them to why is that not playing? Maybe I shouldn't have two GIFs playing at once. Well, that's all right. Anyways, they have a prompt generator that enables you to give kind of volumetric instructions. I want this building to be a podium style building. It's got a podium, and the deck structure is 3 stories, and then it has a tower on top. Oh, there we go. Now it's playing again. And what's really interesting here is that we're starting to see, maybe rather than us manually laying out the design, manually, inputting forms into a SketchUp or a Rhino or a Revit, we can get the bulk of the design off the ground with some quick text-based prompting. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't want to come in after the fact and manually hand adjust things. You can do that. But using things like Hypar, we can begin to rapidly generate forms and iterate those forms based on rules that we give it, based on prompts that we instruct it with. And ultimately, what that means is that our ability to take our preliminary sketches and explore their potential and push the boundaries of the design are enhanced, because we're able to do more in less time. So important metrics to think about in this in this SD phase is going to be tied to things like how many iterations can you put together, how many different proposals can you review and evaluate, right? The more generations that evolve in a certain direction to maximize attributes of the site, to maximize that density or high value views, whatever it looks like. This is where that's going to happen. Once we're in the DD and CD, a lot of the analysis and a lot of the proposals that are focused around kind of energy, sustainability, and comfort, it's harder to make a huge impact on those things as it is at this early stage. So being able to check your proposals and understand how they perform is really important. You can also see over at the right, we have Evolve Labs Veris tool. There's a number of applications out there now that are tapping into things like Midjourney and other image generation AIs to generate, based on the masses that we provide, the materiality and the renderings for our designs. So again, we're providing these preliminary designs to the client. We're looking for them to approve them, and we're looking for comments and feedback from them. These tools give us the ability to rapidly generate and prototype designs. Some of these renderings, I mean, I got started in this industry 15 years ago. I remember using like 3ds Max and taking 2 weeks to generate a single rendering that didn't look half as good as one of those. So kind of just to restate here, with this kind of preliminary sketching phase where we're developing the aesthetics, we're kind of reviewing the schematic floor plans, we're doing the site assessments. All of these things take time. If we can compress that time scale, that's a metric that honestly has a huge impact on the profitability of a firm. If we're able to expand our insights into the design proposals, there's sustainability performance, the general, again, more refinement of the financial metrics. There's things that are highly desired as a firm looks to be more competitive in the market. Once we get into the design development phase, that's really where we get back into our traditional tech stack today, right? That's where we're going to be using, most of us are in Revit. I can't imagine anybody on this call is using AutoCAD as their primary tool. But ultimately, we're in our 3D modeling, our BIM application, and we're beginning to assemble the project. We're developing the plans. We're developing the sections and the elevations. We're making minor revisions to the schematic design. This is where I think we start to look at the ecosystem that can integrate into applications like Revit. What we see here is Orchestra. Orchestra is an application that is just one of many that ultimately is able to provide automation into our design development process, where we're able to do things like automate the generation of views and sheets and even bring in details intelligently. With Orchestra specifically, this is an application that allows you to build custom add-ins for Revit that are powered either through Dynamo or through pure Python. That's what you see on the right with the OKPy tool. It's pure Pythonic code. And in the case of Orchestra, the real value proposition is that your automation is easy to make and easy to deploy to your firm. So we're thinking about what are processes that we can ultimately automate at a minor scale. And that's not necessarily AI based, but it can be. So with that being said, in the design development phase, just understanding that there's a lot of traditional automation opportunity. I would say that my observation is that we haven't seen maybe as much presence of AI in this specific phase and in kind of the construction documents. And it's important to acknowledge why. Obviously, there's kind of an accuracy problem that is present in AI today, right? We can't always be sure that what it's generating is 100% true. There's some notable instances with like ChatGPT where people have used it and it's completely made stuff up. So there is a risk factor when we start getting into the technical documentation and the legal liability that arises from that. So to a certain extent, I think the amount of startup exploration that is in this specific space is a little bit lighter. But that's not to say that it's not coming, because there are startups that are targeting this stuff. As we get into things like building permitting, we start to see a similar kind of story where ultimately there's some huge opportunities for automation in this space. One example is Upcodes. Upcodes has been around for a little bit now, but they're a startup and they recently released their Copilot tool. And basically what it does is it allows you to have kind of an assistant that works alongside you as a designer to verify building code compliance. So you can go in there and you can ask it things like, how many drinking fountains are required if I only have an occupant load of 10? And it can give you that documentation and lets you have the confidence to know, based on this information, here's how many drinking fountains we need. So Upcodes is a great example of a company that was already building kind of a really solid application, and they saw an opportunity for AI to enhance what they were doing. They already had their searchable database of building codes, and now with their Copilot tool, it's made the user experience much better, much easier to use and interact with. Another example of a company that's more focused on this bigger, wider purview of the building department itself is Civit. Civit basically is focused on creating a platform that allows for your building departments to better manage the permitting process on their end. And it helps all parties by having kind of a common platform that we can upload our documents into and submit our permits for. But then from the Civit side, it's actually checking for code compliance and validating that these drawings are ultimately meeting their standards, right? The building codes. It will generate reports and allow the building department to review these reports, and it accelerates their ability to inspect these documents. And this kind of carries forward into the later stages of the permitting process. But what's really interesting about this use case is that we shouldn't just be thinking about automation opportunities from the perspective of us as architects. It's also important to think about things from the perspective of our surrounding project stakeholders, from the owner, the building department, our engineering consultants, the general contractor. Everybody that contributes to the project represents an endpoint which startups and technology are looking to improve those aspects of the project process. Civit being one of those examples, facilitates easier communication and review with the building department. Just some ideas for metrics that we can track on the front of this: time to permit approval, how many rejections, and how many revision memos are you having to send out. The bottom line with the building permitting process is that when we're thinking about things like building codes and permit application, there are tools out there that firms are using today to accelerate their process of getting approval and reducing the amount of permit rejections. We also can kind of get into the CA side, and we begin to see some really interesting technology come up on the CA side. When we're doing our construction administration, this is another area where AI today aligns very strongly. Like there are big strengths that AI has when it comes to observation of sites. And what that really means is that AI is being used to help review and audit and inspect the progress of a project as it's being erected in the field. Again, when we think about like from the observation services, what are some of the main functions that we provide? We are coordinating with the general contractor. We are managing shop drawings and coordinating them with the fabricators. We are getting that final contractor pricing. There's typically going to be punch list. And then there's kind of that final site handover. And from our perspective, that is a lot of work that's frequently underbilled. I think CA is the most common point where projects go over budget and firms take a haircut on their profit. Is where CA goes awry. Projects go longer. It takes a lot more activity on their part, and AI is really able to help in this regard. This AI Con application, they're a startup, and what they're trying to do is basically have cameras that monitor your sites, and they're able to track activities. And you can imagine this isn't necessarily an AI Con specific feature, but you can imagine a world where we're able to validate that the construction is following our details of our construction drawings, that they are following kind of our design, and ultimately, if they're not, you're going to be flagged for that. You don't have to go out to the site to see, hey, the way that this foundation was poured is probably not going to be up to snuff, right? That happens more than you'd like to admit, right? Where maybe a foundation is poured, and because of the contours of the site, I'm calling it from Denver, Colorado, so we have a lot of complex grading that has to happen, and oftentimes that leads to issues when we're pouring foundations. Being able to kind of flag and see this stuff using tools like AICon and a number of others really can help with lightening the load of construction administration, site visits, and make sure that we don't miss things, right? Because these tools are able to monitor at a scale and within an intensity that we just can't do as humans. And it can flag stuff and catch stuff earlier than we can. So I kind of want to wrap things up with just a couple of real examples of where projects have used some of these technologies. So let's turn that off. Here's just an interesting example that was going around social media yesterday, actually, but using Midjourney to generate imagery, and then this new tool called Runway to animate the imagery. So just thinking about one more example of like AI coming in and completely opening a new door for us. We could potentially be animating our designs in a way that we haven't before. But now, to get into a more specific example here, if you're familiar, I expect most of us are familiar with the firm Coop Himmelblau. They're a famous design firm, and they're a fairly big one, but they built their own AI application called Deep Himmelblah, which um, basically was trained on all of their prior projects to help them to kind of generate new design proposals, right? So it's a tool that augments the designer's work. Feel free to check out their website. They published a lot of information on it, but effectively, what this tool does is it's supposed to kind of help the designer and and inform them as they're going through their design iterations. So the AI becomes a co-pilot that helps us in that earliest stage of design, right? We're kind of transitioning from preliminary design and feasibility to that schematic design phase. What kind of design aesthetic, what kind of design moves do we want to make and explore? And what are kind of those endpoints that inform that? Um, there is a video on this, but I'll just describe that in many ways this is a firm specific mid-journey tool that with various inputs they're able to generate designs that are informed and influenced by the rest of their project portfolio and I think their design aesthetic and their design values. And comparing that to like a mid journey where it's not necessarily trained on your specific design aesthetic and values. It's more of just a generalist tool that you can prompt. By training it on your own data, you can have it be more sensitive to your values and what you're looking for. Another really interesting example is being able to turn the physical digital. So this is a really interesting work by Collar Slater. They're a Milwaukee-based architecture firm. And what they've started doing is they're taking simple hand sketches or even physical models and beginning to translate them into Midjourney. So they're taking scans and photographs of their physical models that are just super quick, rough and dirty, high concept, and actually bringing them into applications to generate renderings that they can present to the clients. And it's a really interesting workflow in that what previously might take hours to generate a rendering, in this case, we're still very much having a tactile control over the initial form. But then when we're ready to translate it into something that the client can more easily recognize as a building form, AI is able, with the right prompting, it's able to do this for us in a fraction of the time. So another kind of interesting example here. Now, to kind of bring this all to a close, what I want to kind of emphasize here is kind of the importance of mapping your automation, right? Like when we're thinking about what this looks like, ultimately, this is a process. To unlock your automation, you need to map the automation opportunities. And what that means is I encourage you to go through and really think about what is your firm's project lifecycle. truly from start to finish. Get outside of your Revit and get outside of your Rhinos and SketchUps. Zoom out. Think about what preliminary design means in your firm. How do you do it? How do you go after that? How do you develop business? And where are each of those activities that maybe there's a company, a tool, a person, someone that has the knowledge of how to apply automation to that process, to that step in your design. Consider that and build out your own map, right? Ultimately, when we're thinking about what that looks like, it means that you need to really understand that overall design process. Look at each stage, think about the tools that are out there, and understand this. The rate of change is staggering. All of those startups that are hitting the scene right now, they're launching products on a weekly basis, and it's hard to stay on top of. But by being able to build a map and really beginning to map your automation opportunity to potential applications, you're able to, I think, better plan and stay on top of all of this disruption that's hitting the market today. So that's my presentation, Unlocking Automation in Architecture. I hope that was useful for you. Thanks for your time.